Yeah,
Yeah, you
let's
ready?
do it. I'm ready.
Okay. Welcome everyone to the podcast. So we got myself and Julian here. We're going to be doing an educational live stream. It's a free form discussion this time. We only have a few questions, but the main idea is to convey a dialogue about what's going on in the modern day education system. And that could range from what's going on in public schools to private to what's going on in the university. It was something that our, both me and Julian had that we wanted to talk about. And we also wanted to bring in one of our other Man Talk podcast people before we start recording. Carlos will be joining us midstream, so stand by. Until then, we're going to get this on the road and we're going to start talking about what's going on in the education system.
At least from our perspectives and from what we've seen in dealing with the education system most of our lives.
Right. So it'll be from our own experiences and what we think that about what's going on in modern day that maybe would help someone else have a change of perspective, or maybe they even respond to this and say, actually, if you combined some of these ideas with this one, you would really be having something that without uh, what you had before. So, Julian, do you have anything you want to start us off with?
Sure. I was just gonna start off on paying attention to what the education system's actually teaching like people. So I from my personal experience, I entered a STEM field, specifically engineering, and it's pretty well established what exactly you're gonna get taught from like physics, the chemistry, the math, and all that nice stuff. So there's not a lot of different topics you can deviate to, and even like corrupted, I guess. However, for other subjects that are more subjective, like let's say sociology or psychology or some of those softer sciences, even though psychology is a little better founded, um, you kind of get into this weird territory of subjective school teaching and selective bias on, oh, I'm going to talk about communist movements in America during the 1990s or something. And that's going to be our introduction to American history class. Like, what? Like, what decade are you in? And why, in a class purported to be called American Studies, are we talking about a very small sector of, I guess, American society, specifically society after the 1960s and all these different movements that were going on? That's not exactly what I expected when I read the course description, right? Um, so I just wanted to elaborate on, well, if you're studying a major, if you're in high school, if you're in middle school, and you have a specific topic that you're supposed to cover, make sure that that topic is actually covered and covered in such a way where, at the bare minimum, you have the correct historical facts down. And at the best case scenario, you have a well-rounded like perspective of both sides of, say, uh, something that could be politically charged, because history is all about um, winners and losers and different sides, conflicting, pairing against each other. So it's at least from my perspective better from an educational standpoint to have all sides at the table rather than an ideological perspective, which is just telling you a specific version of events, or well, a perspective that's just completely one-sided, or otherwise just not exactly true because it's leaving out all the details. Uh, so, do you have any thoughts on that, Jacob, about actually paying attention to what your course is supposed to be about, and learning about those subjects?
Seems to me that if we are completely deviating from the coursework foundation, that's going to offset how the course is going to go the entire time, which to a student is going to be, I thought I signed up for American history between 1850 to 2000. Why are we talking about a small sector of the United States instead of the broad spectrum. It even says in the description, we're going to be covering books on what happened in the American West, what happened with people moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, what's going on with the industrialization of Chicago, what's going on with the port developments and the economic developments, the social developments. If we're going to focus in on a super occult group, for let's say, that seems to not be a representative of what's going on in the United States at the entire time of the 1850s, for example. Kind of was expecting more of the lead up to the Civil War and how the Civil War was fought and the downsides of everything that happened afterward and maybe some of the good things that came from it. The Gilded Age in the 1870s. So all of that, if you throw that all out the window, that does a big disservice for someone who really does want to know about broad, big impacting history in the United States of America. So that was something that was in the historical sector of education. That's one thing. I also was going to say about as you go further left on the spectrum, and I don't mean politically, I just mean academically, with mathematics all the way to the right hand side and philosophy all the way to the left hand side, as you start getting more towards gender studies and some of these other majors that don't have a utility in really getting people to think and navigate through modern day, it seems to be doing people a disservice. And I was hoping we could talk a little bit more about how we might be able to get around that in education. Maybe some ideas that would be good for people to step out of their ideologues, as you said previously.
Yeah, so in regards to philosophy, um, the way I would approach it is maybe if the philosophers of the world refrain from doing this weird school of deconstructionism, meaning for those who don't know, deconstructionism, very poorly and broadly speaking, is just you're essentially deconstructing an idea into its base constituent components, almost to the point where it's not a real tangible thing, and it can be whatever your interpretation calls it out to be. So one thing you can deconstruct is like power, right? Power is a favorite thing for people who think that power is only held by a specific class or group of people. But that uh, construction of that concept really gets into a weird, like, subjective realm of, okay, well, what are our presuppositions? How are we establishing framing? Framing is a big thing, right? Because as soon as you set the frame, you can just kind of go wherever you want with that. Uh, so yes, you're supposed to do that in philosophy, where you're dealing with extremely abstract ideas and you're trying to derive some kind of, let's say, truth out of it. Um, but one way of deviating from like getting to this weird mental salad of ideas that doesn't really make any sense to the layman is try to nestle it in pragmatism and reality, meaning like, okay, well, what's the real world implications of your philosophical ideas, right? Can you explain it in a sentence, a paragraph, an essay? If there isn't really a real world implication, then is there a basis for dealing with these abstractions besides hearing yourself talk, hearing yourself think, uh, expounding on words just to hear word salad? Because if you really try to read some people's like writings, especially in philosophy, it's so dense and nebulous and just very like clouded thinking. I guess it's not clear and concise, and doesn't really describe things in a very like easy way that has a direct impact on your life. Um, So, at least in that regard, the pragmatist in me would try to center the education and teaching paradigm away from like weird, like gotcha philosophies or gotcha, like, um, I guess, thought constructs that just kind of feed into themselves and more towards, okay, how will this information, how will these ideas affect me in the real world and benefit me? Or how can we prevent other people from getting out of these thought constructs that just hurt them? Like, say, nihilism, right? So it's like, okay, what ideas have the best benefit to the individual, society, and everyone in between, family, community, what have you? And I think having that discussion, especially in the education system, just outright will kind of gear, I want to say naturally, but it's probably not that natural. It probably has to be more explicit. Gear the conversations away from more of a pessimist, nihilist mindset to more of a pragmatist, like positive mindset. And that'll be greater for all of society because we don't have to have one depressing, like upsetting mindset of how the world works and how there's no hope and humans are destroying everything. How would you approach the situation, Jacob? Would you try to gear those studies or implications, I guess, the results of people's research and all that stuff away from a depressive nihilism, or would you, I guess, go in the similar route that I just described?
Well, I don't know, Julian. It seems I like your ideas, but maybe we can make things more complicated.
Mm,
You think we would? No, no, we're not going to do that. Well, we've read philosophy papers. They It's almost as if they don't want you to really understand what they're getting at. Which to me, as someone also in the STEM fields, is not a good plan if you want to do something in design of something that has to work. It physically has to work. For example, in your case, it's uh, engineering with the roads. With me, it's in process design. Granted, I haven't really been in process design the last couple of years. I've been doing other things, but I've been more of helping out on the general purpose side of dealing with all these wide variety issues. But nonetheless, they have to work. I can't
yes.
just write about it to 30 pages of procedure and have it not work. People will be mad at me because it didn't work. People will find out that Jacob's procedure wasn't effective. So we need to make philosophy, or I would suggest philosophy to have a more utilitarian aspect of it instead of being a wordsmith. And I wouldn't even say that's being a wordsmith. At least a real wordsmith would have a particular direction and get you towards the truth. That's what philosophy was meant to do. If you're just cloaking everything and you're trying to put a depressive element to life and you're always putting your students in this bind of gotcha moments, what are we doing? They're going to be leaving
Confused.
university confused. Yes.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? Isn't a university do the opposite? People come out thinking, wow, look how much I've learned, versus, gee, how much I don't know and I don't want to learn anymore. That seems to be exactly the opposite of what the university should want.
Yeah, it's interesting because that, oh, I've heard from friends in the liberal arts majors in the California state system, maybe less so in the university system, but definitely in the California state system, them coming out of the like filmmaking or English, yeah, they can write better. That's good. But what do they actually learn uh, from their classes besides writing ability? You know? Uh, do they have the skills necessary to like think critically? Do they have the skills necessary to I don't know, do anything more complicated than write a very persuasive essay or write a very creative story. I mean, in terms of, say, if you got a creative writing major, yeah, that's your job, right? You're supposed to be able to be a wordsmith. Um, and if you learn English through your 4 year degree or get your master's or your PhD and become a very knowledgeable person just on the English language, that's great. But if you, for some reason, don't learn English and you somehow come out of college as a worse writer, which I know a few people who maybe they didn't come out as a worse writer, but they didn't actually learn how to write, that's a problem. That's a cause for concern. How did they get through all the checks and balances between when they entered and when they exited, not even learning how to write?
That's critical to everything that their major says. That would be the equivalent of us not knowing how to do even basic calculus or use Excel or I mean, can you imagine an engineer who couldn't use Excel after university?
You'd be surprised.
But on the whole,
Yeah. Excel's like so fundamental for an engineer that if you don't know how to use it, you're really at a severe disadvantage compared to
severe.
your
You're
peers.
you're
Yeah.
like third standard deviation away from the average, below, which is
Yeah.
bad.
It would have been great had, at least in my engineering program, had the undergraduate courses forced us to use some kind of spreadsheets. It was mostly voluntary because the problems were easy enough. Granted, they're just trying to get you the theoretical basis. But had those undergraduate courses had that Excel exposure, at least more so than the junior and senior levels of undergrad, where it's like you're just thrown in the deep end and you have to sink or swim and learn it if you haven't already. Uh, well, I feel like the students would be better prepared for like real world job experiences. And yes, granted, uh, the end all be all of university isn't necessarily to get a job because some people go to like learn and educate themselves. But in our paradigm, 21st century American US citizen, uh, it's doesn't make any financial sense not to utilize your education as a means to find a job because unless you're come from wealth or something, it's an extremely expensive endeavor just to throw throw on your back and carry with you all the way until death if you don't happen to find a job that can pay off the debt.
And so we're taking the conversation now from what philosophy and some of the left side does wrong. We're in all fairness to the other side of the continuum. We're going to start talking about why the STEM fields, some of them even are getting impacted from the education environment. And we have a fair amount of criticisms already that you mentioned. The fact that they're just throwing software at you and just expect to know it. It's getting better now because kids are learning Excel even earlier, and same with some of the other coding and the like. So I think that problem is going away. But for
That's good.
us, I think it did. We got hit with it really hard. We were in this transition period where software was still pretty new. Excel, yeah, it came out in '03, but people weren't really putting it on the forefront of the education system. I think people are starting to learn that that's not as acceptable anymore. Um, but my critique is particularly MATLAB. That is an academic function, not necessarily a industry function. So then there's this clash between what the academics want versus what the industry wants you to learn. And there's this back and forth that they're going to have to keep dialoguing about as technology increases.
Yeah, and to that point, I would say that it's partly the industry's responsibility to help inform the universities and the California state system. Can you please teach your students these topics? Please. They need to know how to um, do basic uh, let's say statics for my field, or basic like mixed designs for pavement engineering, right? Can you please use have a class that requires the use of Excel and using a very simple iteration of formula to just computate all variations of some iterative thing that you need to calculate. Having industry like kind of push back on what university like teaches, because if they to be fair to the university, they just basically want more professors, right? So they're trying to weed out all the people who aren't professor like, so they can get more theoretical minds there to do more research, to pump out more papers, get more money, so on and so forth, right? So the current system from elementary school to university, I would argue, is more geared towards creating little researchers that are punctual, that do their work on time, that can achieve results. And you really don't see that manifest itself in the general population unless you go in the master's or PhD programs. And maybe, if you're lucky, senior year engineering design course where you actually get the uh, build something new, research something new. And you have that 1 year in undergrad, at least for engineering, or 1 quarter even. I'm not sure how long your senior design was.
One
One
quarter.
quarter?
Yep.
Yeah. So all of that other stuff was just building the theoretical basis for that one design thing that you're tasked with doing. And surprisingly, for me, I had 2 quarters, 2 classes. Uh, that one class was the most fun, or those 2 classes, the design work where you actually apply what you learn for so much, was significantly easier than the theoretical basis, and fundamentally more useful in the real world than all the other stuff, which barely gets covered in my, you know, day to day life as a practicing engineer.
Again, though, you said it. They're not exactly wanting to do everything industry wants because academia has its own wants and needs that it wants to fill first. However, it is interesting to note how much industry is having to push for what we need to learn first. And this is a new problem. I don't think people really had this issue going back in the ages of universities. This is a rather modern problem that we're still learning how to dialogue about and talk about, particularly with university. Uh, Before, technology didn't really increase that quickly, and the methods for dealing with different types of work didn't change that much either. So all of a sudden, we're coming from this, again, another ramp up of technology where everyone's still teaching like it's the 1970s chemical engineering classes. Oh, wait a minute. They don't want that anymore? Well, we do, but we actually want you to get more of this next level tier stuff that we've been working on for the last decade. Could you do that? And then they go, well, we don't really know how to teach that. We don't really have the course material for it. We can give you a senior design class like we normally do. We can just change it more for that. Ah, I suppose, but we insist on more education based training on software that's going to apply to what we need to do that is practical. Please listen to us.
So on that front, knowing that there's these flaws on, say, the left and the right side of the spectrum of education, um, do you have any suggestions on how students or parents can empower themselves to actually, not let the current structure of education impede them from accomplishing their educational or professional goals?
Sure. The good news is there's some things with humans that don't change, and one of them is focus on good character. Good character is by no means bad. You need to have it, in order to manifest wherever you want to go. Like we said with the foundation of philosophy, or of a class rather, if you take that foundation of something that's supposed to be broad and you make it narrow, that's going to change the frame of the whole course. So character is the same way. That's going to be the foundation of who they are. If they get their character down, no matter where they go, they can at least learn. They have the opportunity to learn correctly. The second thing is to find mastery in a few niche items so that they can have a talent stack that would be handy to manifest. So for me, it was music. Music was rather important for me to develop not just character, but an emotional intelligence, being able to work with people, soft skills, uh, really listening to something or someone. Music had a real impact on that because you really had to understand the tone of the notes you were playing and how you sound compared to everybody else. So, and that's just one thing. Music's one, sports are another, so you can maintain your physical health. So these are all foundational things that you could still do. So no matter where you go, you can maximize your talent stack. Getting into the final points of how we can figure out how we need to get through. It's unfortunate, but we need to keep moving towards more computer-based training. So if you're going to go in the STEM fields, you need to practice computer-based training. You're going to need to practice Excel and maybe another code language just so you can get used to the logic behind it. But and also, in fairness, you're going to have to do a fair amount of writing. So take the time to do a good essay. Not just an essay for English, but a technical one, a scientific paper, being diversified in how you have to write. So between how to write, your soft skills, your character, and coding, and the new methods for how the STEM fields work, those would be several things that I would put to the table for getting people ready for this. What do you think?
I would add on to that by encouraging parents to maybe not push their kids, but to make their kids aware that they need to be conscious of the complexities that are going to face them once they enter a postgraduate or undergraduate coursework. Mostly that would come, you would hope, from your own personal experiences and sharing, like, oh, okay, this is how my college experience was. This is what you could expect. Here's some pitfalls I went into. Here's some things that you can avoid. Um, for those who don't have that parental structure or network, uh, it comes back to the cliched things you hear freshman year. Like, you should join your organizations or clubs that are relevant to your major, like chemical engineering society for you, right? And then for me, it was like four of them. It was environmental project, concrete canoe, steel bridge, and construction management. So join one of those and learn through your peers and the older people in that group how to function as someone in your major, um, dealing with those complex topics of your major as a freshman or a sophomore. And if that scares you, just know that, well, it's not going to get easier your sophomore, junior, or senior year being scared of unknowns. Um, you do have to put yourself in a very different situation than where you may have been comfortable with in high school or middle school, where you just go to school and then you go home. Uh, Incidentally, from what I've noticed of my peers, the ones who appear to have done the most, uh, who have come out the most successful, also had a great parental upbringing to guide their kids in the right paths, where whether they did music or sports or some kind of extracurricular, like a job, even all of those are infinitely better than being at home playing video games with the blinds closed off from society. because unfortunately society doesn't go away. You can go away, but society doesn't go away, and your need to like participate in society doesn't really go away either. So exposing yourself to it as soon as you physically can, say with like a first job or first uh well extracurricular path, is very important, almost paramount.
So parental guidance and cognizance of their challenges that their child will probably face and most certainly will face are radically different than what they did. And they need to be cognizant of
Right.
those problems, being of good character and cultivating it through their life, having some sort of extracurriculars, as in a part time job, music, sports, being prepared to deal with the STEM field problems if they're going to jump into that, or into the soft sciences, being prepared for what it takes for being in psychology or going into history, and setting themselves up for that kind of path even before they get to school.
Right. And especially like during undergrad internships or just applying to jobs, getting rejected, tweaking your resume, going to your peers, going to the resume workshops on campus. There's a there's a ton of different resources available
A
to
plethora?
yeah, I can't pronounce it at the moment. Plethora, still can't get it, of resources on university campuses that aren't like ideologically driven and just are trying to get you to a good footing to where you can help yourself succeed. And if you don't take advantage of those, someone else will. Someone with better cognizant awareness and well more drive, let's say, to succeed. Because you never know when um, some random stranger will be offer you an invaluable piece of advice that'll stick with you for the rest of your life. So if you still fear strangers going to your senior year of college, then you probably missed out on a lot of experiences.
Yes, and there's always somebody better than you. So get in those particular branches. For us, it was AICHE in the chemical engineering world. That was, if I didn't have that, I don't think I would have made it as far. Nearly. I don't think I would have gotten my first job right out of school 6 months before school ended. I don't think I would have had the connections after the university to keep going. And I would have been able to pay it back. I would have been able to do the mentorship group. And for all the help that people gave me in it as an upperclassman, I wouldn't have been able to pay it back to the lower division people for them coming in. So it was really important for that. I'll disagree with you on one thing, the video games thing. I'd say that would be a great outlet with proper terms, proper boundary conditions. Because sometimes, if you've got as someone who was stressed out a lot in high school, and I'm trying to figure out where I want to go in life, that was a good outlet to just let loose, where it's okay to just shoot a few things for a while online, and then you just, I can just not be so professional all the time. I have an outlet that's okay, and I can just run around and just kind of be a little chaotic without it being everything has to be organized in a box and I have to follow this particular path every single second of the day. It's great to just be able to cut loose,
Right.
and then
I
put it
guess
away.
to be more precise with my words, just to don't use video games as your only outlet with interaction with the outside world. Use it as an augmentation to all the other stuff that I mentioned to ensure that it's a de-stressor. Just how people
Yeah,
use the gym in a healthy, productive way.
it could be another pillar, but don't let it be your only pillar of your life. So that's a pillar, but don't let it take over being able to go take care of your body, take care of your family, be with your friends, and then of course the big pillar that is always daunting as a young person, which is your academic career. It's just it's big. It's a big pillar to overcome. So,
And with that, it looks like Carlos is ready to join in.
oh great, I'll add him to the call.
Yeah.
Carlos, where are you at, buddy? Carlos B 2010. That's him, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he's on. Is everybody in?
I am.
I am. Rep 5 standing by. Carlos, you in? Oh, I see the
Coming in.
boxes. Yeah, I think he's
Oh,
loading in. Yeah, there
yeah.
he is. It's Carlos.
Hey, it's Carlos with his nice, beautiful
Hey,
brush teeth.
We can hear him too. All right. Carlos,
I'm
welcome to
in
the
the
stream. We're streaming right now.
club. We all look really good in this stream.
Can you raise Carlos's volume? He seems a little quiet.
Let's see if I can.
Done.
Well, yeah, Carlos would probably do a better job.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think your photo only shows up as vertical, Carlos.
yeah, that's better. Yeah, you're on the mobile app, so that's for the best.
Yeah. I wish it were the case that you rotate it and then it works, but yeah. So maybe we can get your perspective on this, Carlos. Um, what are some means and methods that I guess a parent or a student in university, high school, or middle school can do to ensure their success in that environment without, I guess, much pain or consternation to their being? Like what resources or what techniques can they use to try to get them across the finish line?
Um, Probably the biggest thing is just community. So,
And
wait, can you hear me? You
yeah,
can hear me? Okay. Yeah, probably the biggest thing is community. You see it. Uh, well, I don't remember too much of elementary, but I'm sure you see it there. You see it in middle school. You see it in high school. You see it in college. All these different affiliate groups that don't necessarily have anything to do with the academic, don't directly have uh that doesn't directly connect to the academic success of a student at first glance. So like, why do we have all these groups? Like, Julian, you had your Aggie TV. I had my dance team. Jacob had his mentorship groups. And once we lost those, once we graduated, we started kind of like drifting away, kind of losing a sense of purpose. And I think that sense of purpose, that sense of belonging, that sense of community is key for students' academic success and getting them across the finish line.
right. And what are, so is it simply just showing up and participating within the community to have a sense of community, or is it a little more complex than that?
Um, well, you definitely have to like want to be a part of the community that you're a part of. I mean, you could get thrown into X community and like, these people don't really understand me, or nah, I don't really feel like I want to understand them. Um, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, basically, I'm asking how does someone jump into a community, let's say, and since you brought up a good counterpoint, is like, oh, what if you can't find any communities that you feel connected to or that could help you out? You just kind of have to force yourself to enjoy it, or how would you yourself navigate it?
Um, there has to be a definite desire, either either because of the people, either because of the people in the group, or because of the hobby. But if there isn't
Yeah.
one, I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on that? I don't know. Like,
So,
I,
for example, what I would do in that situation is enough gumption and spirit in myself. I would create my own little community and try to invite like-minded people into that group so that we can establish our own network and try to generate the culture that I'm looking for that I can't find per se in someone else's community. Because yeah, you're right. If you don't have the spirit or gumption for a particular community, it's going to be tough for you to like feel like you care about that group of people. I've seen that too when I was in university. People creating their own clubs, organizations. It takes a lot of effort, and it's not for everyone. But if you can't find a organization or group of people who are like-minded, like yourself, then there's no harm in just starting your own and then trying to get the right people around you.
I would like to
do
add to
y'all?
what Julian said too. Um, if you can't make your own because it's too much work, and if you're in college or in high school where you have a rather fixed time frame, that could be a real issue. So what else could be done is you could just off branch from an existing group and see if you're able to tolerate it and you're still learning the people and you're still trying to find your way in it. If you're able to succeed, maybe you can move up in that particular club and you can have a subsection that you can lead, and that would be really beneficial for starting a whole new culture within a subculture rather within that group. And that way you still have the infrastructure of a club that you may or may not like as much, but your subculture you might like a lot. And you could argue with me, I actually didn't like ASCHE at first, but I stuck around long enough to see if maybe I could move into a particular position where I could have a subculture. And it started to work that way. I had transfer friends in junior year that really started to change the subculture on its own. So then it was just friends. And then the next year was the mentorship family, where I got to have another subculture there. So it totally changed the dynamic from a club I didn't even like in 2011. So sometimes it's worth sticking it out if you know there's potential and you need to put in the time and investment in people.
Plus, if you're interested in having more of a leadership position within the club, obviously, as a leader of the club, you can really change the focus and direction of how the structure of the club functions, and I guess more specifically, the culture of the club. So, yes, you can do as other people have done in the past and change the culture from within into something that, you know, more aligns with your own individual desires.
Oh, this is like I agree. It looks like
Yeah,
this.
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, yeah. I understand.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Carlos, I wanted to get your
Wait, wait,
opinions
wait.
on
I have a
perceptions and
question.
issues or problems. I know you're excited for this question.
No, no, I had a
Within the
question.
within the educational system. So very I'll try to keep it to one question. Um,
Wait, I had a question.
what's that?
He's got a
I
question.
had a question. Or would that deviate from the
No, you can go ahead. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
okay. So uh tangent to the last question, I was thinking about what what are your thoughts on a person who has found an online community but hasn't found like a in-person community. Like for example, I once had a roommate in college who you guys are laughing because you know where I'm going with this.
Go
uh,
on, go on.
Well, we had the same roommate, but
confidentiality. Once had a roommate in college who really found an online gaming community, but in-person community he was painfully shy and only really interacted with myself and the other roommate. So how would he go about addressing this issue of finding a community to ensure his academic success? Because when I knew him when we were rooming together, he was not academically successful, although he did have this online community.
I could
well,
start once Julian's done.
no, okay. Well, what I would do in this situation is see where the person's at and where exactly they want to, like, what their end goal is. And if you're particularly strong and like close friend, what you can do is bring them along and introduce them into the communities that you're already a part of and see if they like it. Or kind of hold their hand and walk them through different processes that can, well, hopefully see them to the light of what they're supposed to be doing. But it kind of ties back into what you originally said. It's like, well, you kind of have to have that inner drive and care about the community that you're participating in. In this case, you have to have that inner sense of like self worth to know that, okay, well, I'm valuable enough to put myself out there to interact with other people and to actually care about the results that are going to manifest themselves from, well, from, facing what could be construed as fears because, it's not pleasant introducing yourself to new, unfamiliar places, faces, and being rejected, right? So essentially, you have to like. I was going to bring this up before you joined the call with Jacob about how you need to do basically exposure therapy with things that make you feel uncomfortable. So in this case, if people or novel situations make you uncomfortable, then you have to expose yourself to as many novel and uncomfortable situations within your comfort zone until you don't have that same sense of fear and like detrimental, like, oh no, I have to crawl back into my shell and hide away from everybody. So if you do enough of that exposure therapy in terms of just that, fearing other people, that's a good start. And you do that best by starting out with your friends and then work inching your way up to like, oh, a club, and then, oh, okay, how else can I do that? How else can I expose myself to things that I'm fearful of? Well, that's kind of a individual case by case basis too, if you think about it, because everyone has their own different fears. Like surprisingly for me, I don't have a public speaking fear. Being how quiet and shy I am, I would think that I would have that fear, but I don't. I don't mind speaking or just using or talking to a crowd at all. The thing that I actually fear is looking like silly or stupid, and I would be very quiet so I don't like signal myself out of that crowd. But speaking to the crowd, I've done that on a few occasions, and it's fine as long as I know what I'm talking about. It's okay. Um, but I only know that from having to do it because I don't know if I told you guys this, but I gave my high school senior. I was one of the speakers for my high school senior graduation. And I was fine. I was a little like shooken up because I never done it before, but I had my script and I followed it and I read it in my Julian voice, which was probably boring for the audience. But despite that, I did it, and it wasn't. I didn't die, and um, yeah, I just exposed myself to a novel situation that I didn't experience, and then I grew from it. which is what our that who shall not be named former housemate uh, could do himself if he wanted to. Do you have anything to add on to that, Jacob? Or
Yeah, fear is one thing. I would say it's a relationship between fear and courage. So, no fear, I don't buy that. I was scared through undergrad all the time. That wasn't, if I had, so taking that advice at face value, I don't think that's good enough. I think you need to have a fair amount of courage to do it anyway. And
I agree. I agree.
so you encourage people to get out from their shell by doing things in incremental steps, and then they get stronger and braver. And they may, for me, I actually got more scared of some things because I knew of what else could be out there to hurt me. But I got braver and more competent in dealing with it. And I think that was the main driving force to still keep going.
Did
And
you prefer to be dumped in the deep end or the incremental method?
depends on what it is. If it's swimming, I'd say dump them in the deep end because then they have to learn how to swim. They are trying to survive, and then you can take them out if they're not able to do it yet. But that's what my dad did. He threw me in the deep end, and then after a while, I actually liked swimming, and it wasn't that big of a deal because he associated with me of this is how you get in the pool. You jump in. With something like, let's say if someone has got a particular fear of firearms, you don't want to just straight up here. You have to fire 10 rounds right now, and I'm not going to show you how to do it. No, you're gonna. Here is what it looks like on YouTube. Here's the video, and slowly get them used to it. Okay, now today we're going to take a look at one in person, but you don't have to fire it. You don't have to do anything else. And then when you say you've had enough, back off.
Right.
Then we're going to go visit a gun range, but you don't have to shoot anything. You can just watch. And then eventually you can get them to the point where they can load the weapon safely. Cool. They can clear the malfunction safely. Okay, now you can fire. So incremental steps make sense as you move up towards something extremely dangerous, and chance of failure is too much.
Makes sense. Yeah. Anything to add on to that, Carlos?
Yeah. Um, just to add on to what you both said, I was part of an AmeriCorps program where I was an in-classroom mate and small group instructor in Sacramento, and they had this. I forgot what it's called. They had the city year handbook, and in there was a bunch of like little dichos, little saying, for how to be successful in your role, which a lot of the things ultimately apply to, like, rest of your life. So when you both talk about taking small steps or incremental steps and exposing one to whatever, it reminds me of one of the sayings: do 3 squishy things a day. And a squishy thing is defined as, something that makes you a little uncomfortable, something a little out of your comfort zone, because little by little, you'll become more comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's all I have to say about
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense because from a exposure therapy or fear therapy, let's call it that, perspective, if you sure you could dive right in, like in the swimming pool or whatever, but that may be too much for most circumstances. But if you're at least conscious of the squishy things, as Carlos mentioned, um, well, you're aware of your weaker spots, and then you can touch base with those maybe on a daily basis, like your booklet suggests, and that can pay off greatly if you're cognizant of it and you keep working on it. If you lose sight of it, though, then it's just this nagging thing in the back of your head that, oh, my insecurities and problems are following me forever. Woe's me. I can't do anything. Shrivel up in your blanket on your bed and not participate anymore, you know?
That was another roommate we used to have that shall remain nameless.
Big
So,
Steven.
No, he's the opposite of that.
If anything, it's too much bravado. Just saying.
Yeah, it could. Well, for his industry, he probably needs it because everyone else has that bravado too. But Carlos, question: um, what? So I guess because Jacob and I already touched on it, I can get a different perspective from you. But in terms of like looking forward into the future and how you perceive, you know, education and how we have all this knowledge and technology just still seems stopgap to everyone being like successful or accomplished or I guess funneled through the education system in a successful way. What changes would you make to the system so that more people are more, I guess, happy with it or captured by it? Aside from community and building a sense of community, what like structural changes would you implement so that the system itself is healthy and not like a students are numbers. Students aren't really people um, that matter more than like star test scores or statistics. What would you change?
Uh, well, my simple answer is make it free, but can I go by me a summary of what you guys said?
Sure.
Yeah, so Jacob, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Uh, so we talked about this a couple weeks ago in a pre-planning stream, and one of the things that we really wanted to get across in making people feel more valuable and not feel like a number is encouraging students. So not just here you have this exam, you need to get this done. Very robotic, very assembly line. And I was streaming with my friend Matt, and he was saying the same thing about why are we doing this assembly line nature of education when really we should be making it more custom fit to what the students need and what they're going to need for getting through life. So balancing it out. If they're getting fidgety, take them on a run. Let them play, and then when they come back, they'll have all the wiggles out, and they can actually focus on their arithmetic or their story they want to hear. And I think this real sense of love and giving them the need of or the fulfilling the child's needs. Uh, Other things, a lot that have been cut out of schools, and I know this from my mom. She used to be a school teacher. She just retired in 2010, and she was saying about how they just keep throwing math, English, and it was just getting so much into the core where you're throwing out a lot of the stuff that makes it fun, learning about whales or learning about the different oceans and the different people that sailed them. All these additional stories that are meant to inspire kids. And if you can't tell that to them, why are they going to bother learning just math and English? They're not robots. So appeal to them as you would appeal to any other human being, with stories of courage and stories of character and overcoming adversity and how to be competent in the world. So those were some things that we talked about. I don't think that was all of them, but that was a good chunk. What about
Yeah,
you, Julian?
some of the additional stuff, I don't think I mentioned it last time, but really de-emphasize the results of just strict test scores and tying funding to schools to test scores. Because sometimes the community just doesn't have the requisite study skills or people for whatever reason to get the minimum test scores you need to get whatever funding that's tied to it. Maybe those schools should have less emphasis on proficiency or like advanced placement towards like specific topics, English, math, whatever, and have more of a vocational emphasis where it's targeted towards specific like career paths or just different avenues that are not typical of in a normal educational route. You're still learning something, but maybe in strict math and English skills, it's more of like, oh, you learn how to work with your hands. You're doing car shop, or you're doing shop, you're doing home ec, you're doing cooking, you're doing filmmaking, you're doing photography. You just have all these different plethora, whatever that word is,
Plethora.
options. Yeah, of options at your disposal, trades that you can learn that give you a jump start when you actually get into the like industry because it's like, well, imagine being a student who doesn't really care about those core subjects like history, math, English, biology, whatever is in the core, and you just want to work with your hands and be an electrician, right? There's no electrician school or vocational path in high school, at least most high schools. You have to go to junior college and a trade school to get. So my one of my remedies would be just have more vocational options, at least by junior year of high school, to expose potential tradesmen to those fields so they have a general idea of how to get their feet wet. And yeah, they could learn it on the job, but why not learn it in an educational setting in a more formal structure? So, given what Jacob and I have talked about, Carlos, how would you augment the current education system?
From Jacob's thoughts, I heard a lot about taking a storytelling approach to education. People like a good story. They like
A good narrative, yeah.
yeah, they like a good narrative. They don't just like throwing things at them and memorize. From what you said, I like the idea of giving more vocational options, and whether you meant to or not, you said giving lower performing schools more vocational options rather than, like English, math, or science, which to me sounded like give all the low income schools vocational vocational option, which um which when coming from a community where you don't really see people like yourself as, biologists or authors that often, or librarians or anything, you think that maybe vocational options are your only option. Uh, so I don't know, maybe those kids who are good at working at cars good or good chefs are are really great scientists. They just haven't given the thought that they could become a scientist because that's not the image that they have in their mind when they think of like an engineer or uh what's another job? Uh,
A physicist, an
a physicist.
astrophysicist, a
Yeah, I
doctor.
can. Yeah, they just don't see those images, and I haven't even met people like that until I went to college, and like you kind of had to search for like people who look like you in these fields.
Right. So
So,
the
so
vocations can cut both ways. So in addition to just having more options to just strictly lower wage, let's call it vocational options, like a car mechanic or a cook or something that doesn't get usually get paid that much. You can also cut the other way and have more like, oh, let's have a gene biology class where we play with electrophoresis. Let's have a doctor class where we introduce every week we have like a doctor from a different subspecialty come in and talk about what they experience in the field. Better yet, have that doctor um, from the community just say, "Hey, doctor, can you take like an hour out of your 2 hours out of your morning to talk to the students about what it is you do and why you care about it, how you got into it, how someone as a uh, how someone who you don't see a lot of this kind of doctor represented, how you're able to negotiate that path yourself and try to inspire the kids to go that direction. You could definitely cut that direction too. It doesn't only go one way. That's why you have to take more of a holistic approach and assess what exactly the community lacks, what you think the community needs, and then you should also incorporate the community in what they actually want. Because if they, for whatever reason, don't want that exposure to those things, then it's kind of, at least from my perspective, it's kind of a strange thing to offer it and then no one picks up on it. But you can. It depends on each community. Every community is different.
Yeah, and I would say that would be just as bad as what we're doing now with this Common Core thing with math and English. Nobody wants it, but it's being shoved down everyone's throats. If you did that with vocational training and the community there just doesn't apply for it, now you're forcing kids to go into it. Is that much better? I mean, the school really is reaching out to try and make that happen. That doesn't happen naturally to have just random doctors show up and help kids in biology and chemistry get involved into the medical field or try and go to the pre-med route. So it would be wise to make an account for what the community needs first before getting a lot of that stuff started.
Yeah, and if it's a funding issue, that's easy enough thing for the state or county or city to prioritize if they so desire to try to reach out to particularly disenfranchised communities. Um, unless you're in a state that doesn't really care about that. But in a state like California, they're very much in favor of that. It's just a matter of finding the necessary, I guess, policymakers to make it happen. Because I don't know, the state has a lot of special interests, and they certainly have a lot of money to spread around. So I can't imagine it's for a lack of money. If anything, it's just for my imagination's sake, it's more of a special interests are kind of diverting the necessary funds to their own little like textbook schemes or something other than the actual communities affected. But hopefully that changes over time. But that's more of a side note than what what's actionable at the moment. Did you have anything else that you would change, Carlos, in specific communities to try to improve students' participation in the education system, whether it be the students themselves or the families or the administration of the school district?
Just money.
Money.
Yeah,
You
paying.
know about you do know about the studies about how there's a plateau in how much money you get versus how much like results get churned out. You've seen those studies, right?
How much money you personally get?
The school. So like you know how schools based off of taxpayer dollars, depending on where which area they live in,
Uh huh.
they're if a student shows up, each student gets a set amount of dollars per year. I think it's in California, it's pretty low because we have a lot of low income communities, but in other states like Massachusetts, it's pretty high. If I recall correctly, California, the average income sign into the year, whereas in Massachusetts, it's almost double that. It's like $15,000 to $16,000 a year. And coincidentally enough, Massachusetts also happens to have some of the best educational outcomes in the United States. They're a very well educated state uh, on that metric. So Yes, there is a bare minimum amount of money that would definitely help every community and student. Uh, but I think short of just having money, there needs to be a more methodical approach of trying to address each community's specific problems and even each school's problems. Because if imagine a scenario where each school gets the same amount of money and you still have different performance outcomes, then it's not the money that's at play. There's more facets to there's more variables at play. There's more problems that are going on. What do you do then? If you apply more money, how come the school that's getting the same amount of money is doing just as fine? Uh, money only addresses one of the problems. So
Well,
like one
that's
of the thing. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's a classic image of equality versus equity. You guys seen it, right?
Yeah, the circles.
Wait, what circles?
No, go ahead. Oh, you talking about the justice scales?
No, I'm talking about the baseball the cartoon, baseball cartoon.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. You can
It's
describe it.
yeah. If you just put like equality versus equity on your computer cartoon, there's three people. There's like a short person, a medium person, and a really tall person. And then there's the fence covering the baseball fields or something.
That was on
Uh,
Facebook.
yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, yeah. Equality would be like giving them all with a equity would be like giving giving them all what they need, like maybe the short person giving them two boxes. So when I said money earlier, I didn't mean just money. I guess I meant money and then using that money and funding it into the areas that those schools would need, like maybe paying teachers more or schools with a high population of students with special needs, getting more para educators or resource or not English not as their first language, um, getting more like ESL support, English as a second language support, or translators for parents, or I don't know, things like that.
Yeah,
And
that
that's
approach makes a little more sense because in the equity mindset, places where well other communities probably have more more past the finish line, let's say, more of a head start. The other ones are like trailing back. So you're trying to level it out that way. Um, yeah, that makes sense. So I guess the in terms of policy, the way that would shake itself out is communities that acknowledge to have more of a struggling, um, well, initial starting point would have more funding. So, though I don't know. I need to research specifically if there is a plateau on funding, like despite being the community itself, what happens if okay they get even above, but this what's going on. So that's a little research I have to do myself to see what the outcomes of that is. But yeah, those are all good suggestions from each of us. Basically, funding, mentorship, and additional vocation and exposure to different topics. Is there any specific thing either of you think that parents could do to help their students succeed? Let's go to Jacob.
Sure thing. So, with parents, I mean, the mentorship thing, I'm going to keep saying that again. But if you want a different answer on a side, it would be the cultivation of their niches. So it would be up to them to say, you actually have a really good gift here. What if you tried it out in a vocational setting or a club setting or an academic setting? So encouraging their strengths, and then for their weaknesses, giving them the courage to try what they need to do well at general purpose stuff at life. So if they're not so good in, let's say, writing, I wasn't a good writer in school, they should still encourage them to keep at it, find ways for them to practice um, without it turning into an academic chore. I think that's a big problem we talked about already is if you have a academic chore, it's not seeming as if you're going to win something of value from it. So maybe we can do a whole different type of exercise that allows them to just practice writing in a free form and allow them to just develop incrementally. And one of the ways we did that was journaling. So, journaling, there isn't anyone grading you on it, but perhaps you can see and read your own writing and review it with your parents from time to time if it's something non personal, just general event stuff, and then you could figure out a happy medium of how to make it a little better. And instead of it, you have to make it better today, maybe you can just do this one thing a little better tomorrow. And then if you do enough of those, you can put them together, and now you actually have someone who can write average as opposed to below average. So, cultivation of skills through non academic means, making it fun for them as opposed to it seeming like a chore, and encouraging their strengths so that way they can use their own motivation to do something better and better. What about you, Carlos?
What was the question? The parents?
Yeah, what can they
Yeah.
do?
Mm,
In the
I
YouTube
mean,
video, we'll have the timestamp that says Carlos thinking.
We can do that.
um, it's kind of like I definitely like Jacob's suggestion and his thoughts on cultivating academic success through non-academic means. But whenever I get these questions about education, I automatically think about the 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 different cases I've come across as an educator. Like and ones I don't really have an answer for. So to answer your I mean, before I go into that, to answer
Sure.
your question, I guess just stressing the importance of an education and telling them to keep going, which I know is generic, but like the things I was thinking when you came up when you brought up that question was like, well, what do you do if you come from a two-parent household and all the parents were and both parents are like always working, or one parent household parent is always working, or what if uh your English isn't your parents' first language, so they don't know where to look for help, they don't know which resources to look out for, uh or where they can ask for help. So it's just kind of like you leave it up to the schools, and and kind of give the agency to the student to kind of figure out their own plan for success, which is difficult. I mean, just growing up and one, um, if you're not around a culture where uh, uplifting yourself and uplifting those in your community is important, and you just see everybody else like having fun or fucking around, then you're not gonna want to do that either. So that just leaves you falling farther and farther behind because you didn't think to ask for help when you needed it, and then when you do need to ask for help, you're like already a couple grade levels behind, and then you're like, well, what's the point? I'm not gonna catch up anyways, and I'm just gonna keep having fun. I don't know. Uh, but in other cases, I guess parents can uh just keep involved with their students' lives best they can. Like, what you've been up to, what are you doing? Just kind of listening to what their students say, like, oh, I'm interested in this or I want to try this. Just asking around their friends or the schools, like, oh, where can my son learn more about photography? Or where can my son learn more about how to be a great dancer like their uncle Carlos? You know,
So in that example, right, we both can explain why we got interested in dance or photography, right? And that kind of touches on the students, I guess, awareness levels of are they actually interested in something? And if so, do they know how to research that interest and explore it and tease it out to make it less of this like abstract thing that they desire and more something tangible that they actually want to like pursue? Like in my case, I liked movies growing up. I watched a lot of movies, and I liked everything that had to do with film. Um, I'm pretty sure most people growing up had exposure to film as well in terms of movies. Like it wasn't necessarily like a special privilege. As long as you had a TV, you could watch a movie. Um, and then for me, the next step was okay. Well, I like movies enough to the point where I want to play with those things. I happened to go to a middle school that had cameras that I could play with and screw around editing. And my home happened to have a camera where I could do that too. For the lower income communities that may not have access to either of those, whether it be a school or their own household where they can play around with the camera, these days it's actually a lot easier than it used to be. Because you know what else is a video camera? Your phone. And everyone has a phone now. So as long as your phone can hit record, you can make little movies. Um, I think kind of what we're touching on too, which it may not be apparently obvious, but might be more obvious when I bring it up, is maybe the blind spots and knowing what you need to look for in terms of how to succeed in whatever you're looking for. So, like, for example, the other day, I think I asked your sister, oh, what do you want to do or whatever with your life? And I didn't phrase it that crudely. It was a little more tactful, but it basically came out. It was that crude. Okay.
yeah, that crude.
Okay. Well, what do you want to do with your life, right? The big nebulous question. And she kind of paused and did that long pause that you did just now when you were asked the question. It was like, oh, I don't know. And then you came to her defense and said, well, I haven't really thought about it. Um, which is fair, right? If you never thought about it, then how are you going to answer such a big question? This kind of tails back all the way around to my exposure therapy point. Like, oh, being in a community that maybe doesn't prioritize partying, but exposes you to like outcomes of your choices. Like, oh, okay, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to be like a doctor or whatever, right? Something kind of difficult to do if you just say it. But at least that's the initial starting point. Like, oh, this ideal I want, and this is I'm gonna put that out there. Okay. let's say that's your first step. Then obviously you need a follow up. Like, okay, how do you become a doctor? What do you do? That question, the how part, I think a lot of folks get stuck there because it's hard. It's like, what do you mean how? Like, I want to be a doctor. I'll just become a doctor, right? It's like, no, that's not how that works. You have to research and do some background information on all the necessary prerequisites and the difficulties about it to become a doctor. And if that doesn't scare you away, uh, yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna have to head out.
Oh,
Oh,
it's
okay.
9:30. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, see you, Carlos. My point still stands. If for what before you go, if for what for whatever reason, the idea doesn't even cross your mind, what a parent can do is just put that idea out there so that at least the thought crosses their mind. Like if the parent doesn't even suggest it, how's it going to come out, or how they even going to think about it? So start there. Put the question out there. Pose the thought. Okay, see you, Carlos.
Nice
Bye.
Bye.
talking to you guys.
So
Whoa!
yeah,
Hang on. I gotta fix it. All right, there we go.
yeah.
Well, it went straight. I got a 40-inch screen, so it just went. Whoa!
Your
That's a lot of
face.
Julian.
Or oh yeah, I just saw your face. But yeah, it's like Carlos did bring up a good point. It's like, oh, they come. There's a community of people who aren't really like focused on anything besides having a good time and partying, and before you know it, you're behind. And it's like, well, if as a parent, if I were a parent in that situation, what I would do is have the kid seriously think about as early as possible. Like, it's not supposed to be this like doom and gloom thing. It's just supposed to be like, okay, be conscious of this. Uh, where do you want to go in life? Journaling is a great example of what is very helpful because you're not telling them the answer, right? You're giving them the space to flesh out the answer on their own. And that's very powerful in terms of writing your own narrative, writing your own story instead of having someone else uh, subscribe to a story, you know? And at least the vibe that I get from maybe other cultures or something is that that narrative isn't like explained early on at a young enough age to be like, oh, okay, well, there's this career path that ties into your identity, and you potentially get to choose it if you care about school enough and see like the end game, let's say. So, any comments or thoughts on that, Jacob?
Yeah, bring it up as early as possible, but in a way where they can. It doesn't have to be you need to figure it out today. It's just you're putting it in their life early on where they can that you get them curious. Their curiosity can go all sorts of ways for several years, but just the fact that it was brought up already allows for them to even consider it as an option. It's in their life. So it doesn't have to be front and center yet since they're just a child, but as they get older, they can be thankful that, okay, I did spend just a little bit of time as I grew up thinking about it. And because I got to have a life first, now this I actually have enough experience to really put some real pieces together. This actually could work. Now they're off on their own and they're doing it on their own.
Yeah, and stimulating that curiosity in your kid is a very powerful way of having them like think for themselves for one and kind of see past what's immediately in front of them, which is more of a basic survival tactic. If you only do what's immediately in front of you, right? If you utilize that relatively unique human project yourself into the future and imagine different scenarios that can be extremely powerful, especially in a journaling format, because you can just do a web chart of different branches of your life. That's a good
Did you
blur.
like that?
Yeah, a good. Well, it blurred out the camera, but different branches of your life, and it's like it's imaginative, right? None of those branches have to happen the way you think it will, but the idea is your abilities, and that awareness is very powerful and can help you chart your way through. You know what's that called? Whatever you went through your first 2 years of chemi, the meat grinder.
Yeah, I would say just lower division. Um,
Right.
yeah, lower division sucked.
I'm assuming you saw someone showed you a bigger picture of what it all meant, right? At some point, or you found it yourself.
You talking about someone showing lower division? No, no one showed me why lower division mattered. I had to figure that out on my own. I was kind of pissed.
Oh,
Well,
well,
and
then
that's
you'd be a great candidate for having that exposure to why it mattered in the long run.
it mattered a lot, and people really lose sight of it when you're in lower div because it isn't. You're not seeing 4 years; you're seeing 1 year at a time. But if you knew what a fourth year class would be like or a third year class, and you realize how hard some of the technical stuff is in the third year, you would do well to sharpen up those first 2 years and find a way to get stronger. Really, what I told mentees was you need to get stronger. You are not capable to handle this right now. And this is what it's going to take for you to get stronger and smarter, more adaptive, all those things. I felt like I had to rewire and reconstruct my brain into a completely new and improved design every year. It wasn't good enough every year where it had to be redesigned and improved consistently. And I tried to make it fun for them because, well, it's not fun to redesign yourself and make yourself better. It takes a lot of work. So, but if you just light the way a little bit and give them the encouragement and show them the benefits, and then really act and care for them in that way, I think that's something they really appreciated and they could see the value in it just because they saw somebody that said, you're worth getting yourself together today. And slowly, as you continue through university.
Right. And add on to that, I would say that some of the best mentors are the ones that give you a realistic, detailed explanation of what to expect from your studies, or otherwise what's going to happen post undergraduate or postgraduate.
And it doesn't even have to be everything. It's just getting them prepared. I think people in university really appreciate it when they feel like they're getting prepared for something that's bigger than what they're in now. Because when you're 18 and you're just starting out, it seems as if there's not that much to prepare for until you get to junior year. And that's just not true. So a lot of people end up wasting it. And because they didn't waste it, they got into leadership positions. These mentees were able to really start their junior year with a lot more strength. And it was so cool to watch them grow. And it was sad because, well, why can't everyone have that? I think that's how we were wired.
To take in and understand the bigger.
Understanding the bigger picture. Yeah. But also just learning how to take your abilities and refine them, not because, oh, I have to, but I want to. There's value in it. My friends will be better for it. I will have a life that is not just what I can have today, but what I'm going to be able to maintain for years, decades even, because they decided to work harder now. And they forget, I'd say people forget that once you leave university or you leave your academic environment, if you don't keep growing on your own, there's not a lot of people who are going to push you.
Mm.
So this is your chance to really put the rocket boosters in play and allow the momentum to just carry a lot of your life. And you can use that momentum to do a lot more because you focused on yourself and made yourself competent. So, and then now you can start giving it back. And that would be my goal for anyone that's going to enter middle age, is once they get into middle age, it's less about your path and more about getting everyone else up to speed. And your life priorities shift, and there is this real targeted sense of getting other people up. So, but other than that, did you want to talk about anything else from our notes? I think we hit most of it.
Yeah, I think we did too. We didn't talk about punishment, but that's a whole nother like big topic to cover, so maybe we can leave that off for another time.
I think that would be a smart move because that's an easy 20 minutes. And
Yeah.
I know we're probably about the range for the stream, so.
Yeah, it's like for our total talking time, it's been like 3 hours, so it's probably a good spot.
Well, cool. Well, everyone, thanks for watching. This is the first time we ever did 3. So, thank you very much.